Morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning.
Welcome to St Michael's Manor. Thanks very much for coming along this morning. I hope you'll find our event useful and informative. My name's Chris Wallace, and I'm the Managing Director of Visionary Accountants. We're St Albans-based accountancy practice, focused mainly on working closely with SMEs to help them grow their businesses. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Richard Porter. Richard's an expert on auto-enrolment, and he's here today to raise awareness of the key issues and challenges facing SMEs in successfully implementing the new workplace pensions regime that's currently underway in the UK. Richard.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I've been allowed 5 slides today to try and communicate to you all the things that you need to be aware of with auto-enrolment. So I have an agenda, but the key thing, as Chris mentioned, is all I'm trying to do today is just make you raise awareness, okay? Just make you aware of some of the important issues that you need to look at. So firstly, I'm just going to remind us, what is auto-enrolment? What is the purpose? What's the point? What is expected of you as an employers? The lessons that I've learnt from helping over 20 companies successfully stage. It is compulsory. I want to tell you what the regulator have been up to over the last 12 months. And then hopefully I'm going to give you some key thoughts to point us to be successful. So what is it? Basically, the government wants all employers in the UK to automatically enrol all their qualifying members of staff into a workplace pension. Why? Well, back in 1909, they started the state pension. Back then, it was heavily means tested. You could only qualify if you're over the age of 70, and it was 5 shillings a week. Back then, only 5% of the population were over 70, so it wasn't a great strain on the Treasury. So since then, obviously, we've been living longer, and it's a great strain on the public purse. So does everyone remember stakeholder? Right, well, that was the start. That's what the government tried in 2001 to help bridge that savings gap. Did everyone do stakeholder? All you had to do was have a poster, stick it somewhere, and then you had a scheme. Back in 2001, I was a pension consultant who thought I was going to be rich on the back of stakeholder, because I thought everyone was going to flood and pay into pensions. We didn't get any pension contributions, okay? So that was the first attempt. And if anyone didn't do it, don't worry, because you don't have to do it anymore, because you've got to do auto-enrolment. So basically, anyone over the age of 22 earning over £10,000 a year, you have to put them into a pension plan. Okay, they're the key things. And by October 2018, you'll be expected to pay 3% as an employer contribution into the plan. Your member of staff will be expected to pay 5%. So that's where we're starting from. This has been running for 20 years in Australia, and they're already up to 9%, nudging up to 12%, phasing over the next 15 years, okay? So this might not be the end. So what is expected? I've tried to break this down into 8 categories, and this is by no means everything that needs to be considered. As I said, you've got to put in place a qualifying workplace pension. That is probably the only time I'm going to mention the word pension, because this has got nothing to do with a pension. This is about process, administration. It's not about the pension. The pension's the easy bit. I could probably, or Chris could organise for everyone in this room by the end of today to have a qualifying workplace pension. It might charge you a fee, but we could do it. But that isn't what this is about. This is about process. So firstly, you've got to categorise your workers. You've got your qualifying workers, which I talked about, being over at the age of 22, over £10,000. Then you've got non-qualifying who might want to join, and those that are entitled to join, but you don't have to pay a pension contribution for them. Before your staging date, has everyone got their staging date? No? Okay. Well, you will be, the regulator will be writing to you within 12 months of your staging date to remind you of your responsibilities, okay? Some of those letters have gone missing, so there's a great useful page on the regulator website where you can actually put in your pay reference number and it will categorically tell you when you're expected to stage. We've had some very large companies that didn't have a clue when they were staging because the letter went to the wrong person within the organisation. So just be careful of that. So you've got to communicate to your staff before staging, but you've also got to decide that you're going to postpone from your staging date. You've also got to communicate to your staff the level of contributions that you're going to be making for your staff and on what definition of salary you have chosen as an employer to adopt for your auto-enrolment, okay? And from your staging date, you will be assessing your workforce, and you will then be assessing your workforce for every pay reference period after your staging date. So it's continual, it doesn't stop. So is there anyone in the room who has a weekly payroll? Good, because that's a lot more work, obviously. So if you've only got monthly payroll, that's a good starting point, okay? You've then got to ensure that you're paying the correct contributions for all your employees into the pension, okay? And it's interesting that the amount of penalty notices that the regulator have been sending out, a lot of them have been for incorrect deductions from staff's pay slips, okay? They're deducting the wrong amount in the first place. Some very large companies have been caught by that. But the next thing is that once you've done your initial staging, you've then got to be careful. All new members of staff and all new existing members of staff who have a change in circumstances, again, they'll be picked up by your assessment process and they will then be communicated to say either welcome to the company, you're going to be auto-enrolled, or you've just had a pay rise, you're now a qualifying member and you will be joining the auto-enrolment scheme. So once we've got them in, next thing we've got to plan for is how we're going to pay them back if they opt out. You might be thinking, what is he talking about? We've just got them in the scheme. But the government allows people to then opt out of their pension scheme. That sounds quite straightforward, but in an ideal world, you're meant to refund their contributions the following month after the initial deduction. So they've been auto-enrolled, payment's been made, they then have correspondence from the pension provider, they can decide to opt out online, by telephone or by letter, and then whoever runs your payroll has a responsibility of getting that money back from the pension provider, back through the payroll system and back to the members of the staff the following pay reference period. So it's not that straightforward. And finally, you've got to keep detailed records of everything that you've done going back 6 years. So that potentially, if the regulator were to knock on your door and say, can you tell me what you've been doing over the last few years, prove to me that you've been auto-enrolling everyone at the right time, deducting the right contributions, reminding people to be auto-enrolled, you need to be able to demonstrate that. And that's quite tough. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we've been very busy in this area. I'm glad to say that the last one I helped with was 110 members of staff. I've now managed to auto-enroll a one-person scheme. So I've got the full spectrum of experience now. And the biggest challenge by far is this assessment, to be able to have a robust process in place to continually assess your workforce. Seems to be the biggest challenge that I've faced with employers. Why is that? Well, it's the quality of the data, double entries, dates of birth, wrong salaries, all of these things create problems because communication goes out from that data. So the amount of telephone calls I've taken from members of staff who think they've been have the wrong contributions have been deducted. Well, they may well have been because the wrong information was fed through the system, wrong definition of salary. That's a good one. Agreements are made at board level as to the level of contribution and what definition of salary. Payroll don't get that communication and they're deducting completely the wrong deductions, okay? So that's the first thing. The quality of the software system being used to assess the workforce, you've basically got the choice. You do it yourself. You could do it yourself. Be complicated, be expensive, but you could do it. You could use a provider software package, or you can use a payroll solution, or you can use middleware indeed. There's probably 4 ways you can actually do this. But what we found is some of them are very, very expensive and very inflexible. We know of 1 or 2 payroll providers that for any changes you want to make, they're now saying it's 26 weeks to make a change. Incredible. But that's where we are. looking more internally, another problem has been poor communication within a company. HR deciding on a contribution level and a salary definition, but not telling the finance director who's having kittens because he didn't realise it was going to cost that much, and then not telling the payroll. So there needs to be a team effort to get to be successful at this, basically. And then finally, I said I wouldn't mention it, but I will once more, is pension providers. They're being very picky. They're picking the best quality schemes now, so they're cherry picking. So it's not quite as easy to go to the marketplace and choose between Standard Life, Scottish Widows, Aviva, because they're shutting their doors to new companies and new schemes, because they can't supply any more than they are already. Demand is getting very high. And just very quickly, it is compulsory. It's not like stakeholder pensions. This is actually enforceable. Interesting enough, though, the regulator up until recently hadn't actually fined anyone. They were just trying to make sure, coerce people through the process. But now they are starting to fine. The number of penalty notices has increased from 17 to 177 over the last 3 months. So they are taking this seriously. You can see some of the potential fines that are there. In July alone, 12,000 companies were expected to have staged. So the regulator is now waiting for them to confirm that with a registration. We're not convinced, and the stats are beginning to suggest that they might not all have successfully staged. But we'll wait and see. But regardless of these fines, actually at the end of the day, if you don't do it properly, it's not the fine, it's the actual cost of your time for getting it right and correcting it in the first place, okay? So that's the real issue here. You can do it yourself, or you can get someone to help you and save you a lot of time, which is SMEs, that's your value, is your time. So just finally, my final slide before I hand back to Chris, is I've just got some key messages that hopefully you can take away. And the first one is no surprise really, is I think the earlier you start, the better. The regulator started saying 9 to 12 months. I think the last time I looked, it's actually saying 12 to 18 months. So they've recognised that this does take time to put in place. And without a doubt, establish who's doing your assessment, how you're going to do it, sit down and work out exactly who you're going to ask to help. Are you using software? Are you using payroll? Are you going to do it yourself? Because that, once you've got that in place, the rest should follow through quite nicely. And again, my experience with this is keep everything really simple. With the communication I mentioned earlier, the regulator gives you 13 different types of letters you can send out to your staff. You can send out different categories, categorise your staff and send out a different letter to every single category of worker. But if you do that, you've then got to write to them again to tell them if their circumstances change. Why not just use the one simple letter which covers all aspects and keeps it simple for you? You don't then have to re-communicate to them if their circumstances change. Again, a project plan is really, really important. Put ownerships and timescales on that project plan so you make sure it keeps to timescales, okay? Because that, again, can cause problems further along the line. And my final point, it may seem obvious, but if you've gone through this whole process and you've done it successfully, you've done it correctly, and you've done it compliantly, for goodness sake, don't forget to register with the regulator at the end. Because if you don't, as far as they're concerned, all your good work over the last 12 months, they don't know about it. So they'll be knocking on the door, asking why you haven't registered, and it's just register at the end of it. That's all I've got to say on it. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. I think that was a really informative overview. I think, as you can probably see, also enrolment is complicated, and we could probably spend the entire day going through all the detail of it. So I'm sure you'd be very grateful that we're not going to. It's complicated and it's time consuming. So what we are saying and what we're offering is a simple one-stop shop, end-to-end solution for auto-enrolment. It takes the headache away from the employer, and we can take the process from beginning to end, from the assessment of the workforce, all the communication, the record keeping, the payroll solution, the correct deductions and payments, through to putting the correct pension provision in place and making the contributions. And we just take the whole thing away and deliver it for the employer. And I think the big point about that is the attitude can be towards auto-enrolment that it's a very negative thing. It's a nightmare for employers. And I think if you get a good solution in place that takes that headache away, the employer could look at it as a positive thing, a benefit, something that they can take credit for, offering their staff this great benefit, an effective pay rise. And hopefully, if employers work with us, they'll be able to look at auto-enrolment that way. Okay, that's it from us. Thanks very much for coming today and for listening, and I hope you found it useful. There's some literature on your chairs for you to take away. There's a feedback form there as well, and we'd really appreciate any feedback. If you could leave that form with us, that'd be great. Thank you. You're welcome to stay on afterwards. We're going to be here for any questions you might have and another coffee if you like. Otherwise, please do get in touch. Our contact details are up there if you would like us to come and see you and look at what we can do to put a plan in place for you to solve auto-enrolment. Thank you very much.